Today we are exploring the strange and fluffy world of Harry, a mysterious Bigfoot creature who enters the suburban life, where he befriends his very own John Lithgow, because hey, at the end of the day, everyone should befriend a John Lithgow. Although on the surface this may seem like an oddball comedy about the wacky hijinks of this monstrous mythical being trying to adapt to the modern day family life in the suburbs, it's actually a really sad movie. It feels more E.T. than it does comedy monster, with strong themes of animal rights, I think anyway. However, the release of Harry and the Hendersons would be a messy one, where it would have to get its very title of the movie changed several times, as well as a course correction in its marketing. And so with all this chaos, something got lost along the way, that being Harry's humanity. So in today's episode of Weird Tales of Pop Culture, we're once again returning to the video store to try and figure out once and for all, why does Harry and the Hendersons have several different movie titles, and the effects that this had on the movie upon its release. Well, I'm ready. Are you ready? I hope we're all ready, so let's check it out. So to try and figure out how there was 3 different movie titles for Harry and the Hendersons, we have to go back to the beginning, yeah! Well, Harry was the creation of scriptwriters William E. Martin and Ezra Raposa. When they first conceived the notion of Harry and the Hendersons, they originally saw it as being a sitcom. And why not? After all, this premise of a strange being living with a normal family in their home worked wonders for fellow sitcom Alf. Although, according to the writers, they actually took inspiration from the Munsters and the Addams Family. However, when this potential outline for a sitcom found its way to director William Dear, is where things changed. Dear was looking for his next movie after the box office sinking of his previous movie, Time Rider: The Adventure of Lyle Swan. He was already aware of the Harry and the Hendersons project, as William E. Martin and Ezra Raposa had already told him about it at a cocktail party, as you do. He caught up with them and he asked them how that project was going. And Dear saw that there was more of a spectacle with this premise other than just being a sitcom, but instead a feature-length movie. Dear himself would go on to work on the script, presumably making it less sitcom and more heartfelt and emotional. Dear would also become the movie's director and co-producer, suggesting something of a passion project for him. The name Harry itself came from musician Harry Nilsson. As co-writer, William Martin was a fan of Nilsson and even worked with him in the past, writing several songs for the musician for his album Harry. However, the project really started to take off thanks to Steven Spielberg. Director William Dear had previously worked with Spielberg when he directed an episode of Amazing Stories called Mummy Daddy, and Spielberg was impressed with Dear's work on that episode. One day Spielberg asked Dear what was the next movie project that he had in the works, and Dear told him about Harry and the Hendersons. So this obviously struck a chord with Spielberg, as his production company Amblin came on board to produce the movie. And Harry and the Hendersons would have been right up Amblin's alley, as during the 80s the company would produce many crowd-pleasing family fantasy movies, with the likes of Back to the Future, The Goonies, Gremlins, and E.T., and many others. In fact, I think E.T. is the key here, as Harry and the Hendersons does have similar themes, in that it's a personal journey of a human befriending a fantastical creature, while also being a discovery of identity and dignity, and finding humanity and kindness where others may see a monster or a weird creature. Basically, Harry and the Hendersons is E.T., but with a Sasquatch. Yeah. The groundbreaking special makeup effects would be provided by the legendary Rick Baker, who previously provided the makeup effects for An American Werewolf in London and the Thriller music video. Baker's amazing effects really bring the movie to life and give Harry a soul. Interestingly though, Baker originally didn't want to work on the movie, as he wasn't happy with Steven Spielberg, as Baker was previously working on the alien creature effects for a movie Spielberg was making called Night Skies. But Spielberg abandoned the project, and thus all of Baker's hard work was also abandoned too. So he wasn't too thrilled about that. But director William Dear convinced Baker to bury the hatchet and to make amends with Spielberg, which he did. And incidentally, later down the track he would work on other Spielberg projects like the Men in Black movies. Then there was the casting of John Lithgow as George Henderson. At first, the powers that be didn't want him cast in the role, despite director William Dear really wanting him for the part. And even Lithgow himself didn't want to be cast. Basically, the studio wanted a bigger name, and Lithgow felt that his character was ridiculous. However, both the studio and Lithgow would eventually be convinced, so he was cast. And Harry himself was played by actor Kevin Peter Hall, who that very same year starred as another out-of-this-world creature, but a more terrifying one, as he also played the Predator in Predator. Yeah. And so filming took place in the Washington state, particularly around Seattle, with the shoot lasting about 4 months. So surely this spectacular movie about this amazing creature being produced by Spielberg's company was bound to be a sure hit. In theory, anyway. When it came to marketing Harry and the Hendersons, it was decided to not actually show Harry. Nope, we don't see him in the trailer, nor do we see him in all his glory on the poster. Now this wasn't rare for its time, as Amblin did the same thing when promoting fellow Creature Family movies, E.T. and Gremlins, in that in the trailers for those movies, you don't actually see E.T. or the Gremlins, but rather just little hints of them. And just like Harry and the Hendersons, their original posters also keep it a mystery as to what the creatures in those movies look like. The early teaser trailer for Harry and the Hendersons was interesting, as it featured scenes specifically filmed for the trailer, where we see Harry's silhouette approaching the Henderson household. So, why wasn't Harry himself actually featured in any of the promotional advertising of the movie? Well, this is because the US marketing campaign didn't want to give away the Bigfoot, aka Harry, and they wanted him to be a surprise for movie audiences for the first time they see the movie. I guess the strategy was leave a little mystery in the trailers and the posters, which only offer tiny clues as to what Harry actually looks like, to make people think that they just have to see this movie to see for themselves what this movie Bigfoot actually looks like, how he appears in the film. A strategy that did work for E.T. and Gremlins, but not necessarily here. So, he wasn't featured on the movie's poster or original trailer. This is why on the US poster, you have this bland black poster with Harry's sad eyes and of course the movie's title, Harry and the Hendersons. Now, the problem is, unless casual viewers saw the small print on the poster that explains that this is about a Bigfoot, they wouldn't have known, and maybe even thought that the movie was about some random ass guy called Harry. Yep, just a regular Joe called Harry. So, box office wise, the movie was disappointing. It was released in June 1987, and it was in the 3rd place in the box office behind Beverly Hills Cop 2 and The Untouchables. And domestically, it only made $29.8 million on a $10 million budget. So it wasn't a disaster, but still much lower than anticipated. And of course, the movie's marketing was given the blame for the movie's poor box office performance, thanks to not actually showing Harry in all his Bigfoot-ness. So when it came to the UK and other parts of Europe, the powers that be learned from the mistakes of the US release, and did the opposite. They decided to solely focus on the fact that this is a movie about Bigfoot, and here he is in all his glory. With the movie being retitled to Bigfoot and the Hendersons, with it doing the exact opposite of the US marketing and letting potential audiences know exactly what they are in for. A movie about a big, giant, hairy Bigfoot. The irony is, the movie Harry and the Hendersons is a movie which has an important message that Harry isn't just a Bigfoot. He's a kind and caring soul with lots of heart. That's why the movie is called Harry and the Hendersons, to humanize Harry and to say he's not just a monster. Whereas retitling the movie to Bigfoot and the Hendersons is kind of basically saying, nah, he's just a Bigfoot after all. Going for the more monstrous spectacle approach rather than the heart and soul dynamic. The promotional artwork also went more in the direction of an oddball comedy too. So yeah, this was actually a counteraction after the US release, which just advertised the movie about Harry, whereas now the fact that he was a Bigfoot was the selling point. But, you know, I think it kind of worked. Before moving to Australia, I can actually remember being a little boy in England and knowing the movie as Bigfoot and the Hendersons. In fact, going by memory, people would often simply just refer to the movie as Bigfoot. Yep, just simply Bigfoot. Now, to briefly put Harry and the Hendersons aside for a moment, its name change isn't entirely rare. Many countries have had title changes for movies for all sorts of reasons. To start off with, from one Harry to another, the movie Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was actually retitled to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone in America, because it was felt that the word philosopher was too old-fashioned for American audiences. Let's not forget that due to translation issues in certain Spanish-speaking countries, the movie Grease was retitled to Vaseline. One of the most obscure cases here in Australia is the movie Airplane, which had been retitled in this part of the world to Flying High. In fact, here in this part of the world, it's still called Flying High. A title change, all because some silly sausage here in Australia thought that if the movie was called Airplane, people would get it confused with the movie The Concorde Airport 79, because clearly someone wasn't thinking that day. Are you a fan of the children's sports movie The Mighty Ducks? Well, guess what? It doesn't exist here. In Australia, the movie is known as Champions, because by the time the movie came out here in Australia, the sequel D2 The Mighty Ducks was already on its way. And the Australian distributors were worried that the titles were too similar and people wouldn't be able to tell the difference. So the Mighty Ducks became Champions, and D2 The Mighty Ducks simply became The Mighty Ducks, giving the sequel the title of the first movie's American title. Yeah, are you confused yet? In some parts of the world, the movie Adventures in Babysitting was retitled to A Night on the Town. Why? What purpose was this for? Who knows? Speaking of E.T., in 1986, an Australian kids' adventure movie came out called Frog Dreaming, which was kind of Australia's answer to those Spielberg adventure fantasy movies like E.T. and The Goonies. And hey, it even starred Henry Thomas himself. However, when Frog Dreaming was released in America, it was retitled to The Quest. And oddly, in the UK, it was retitled to The Go Kids, which is really weird, as the term The Go Kids is never mentioned in the movie. Like, who are the Go Kids? I don't know. Seriously though, guys, pick a title. Some of the title changes you may not have even noticed, namely the Australian and American releases of Crocodile Dundee. Now I know what you're thinking. Both those titles look the same, what's the difference? Well, in Australia, for its 20th Century Fox release, the movie was simply called Crocodile Dundee. But in the American Paramount Pictures release, the name Crocodile had quotation marks, as in crocodile, laying the foundation that crocodile is a nickname and not a reference to an actual crocodile. This is because the American distributors were worried that because of the movie Alligator, American audiences would think that just like that movie, Crocodile Dundee was a similar horror film about a killer crocodile. So they had to use crocodile in quotation marks. So which title is better? Who knows? We could have this discussion forever as to which country had the better movie title, along with other discussions, like which country had the better VHS releases in general, America's tiny little thin cardboard cases, or Australia's big chunky plastic ones. I mean, really, it doesn't matter, and at the end of the day, it'll just lead to nonsensical bickering.
Australian VHS is better! I am big and strong and look great on display. No! American VHS is better. I am nice and compact and don't take up much room. Oh, really full. Really. Stop looking at me, Jaws!
And this isn't a phenomenon that's restricted to old movies. Even movies made within the last 20 years have had international title changes. For example, here in Australia, Live Free or Die Hard was retitled to Die Hard 4.0. The Hangover was retitled to Very Bad Trip in France. The original Avengers was retitled to Avengers Assemble in the UK. And the comedy movie Neighbours was retitled to Bad Neighbours here in Australia. Probably so Australians don't get it confused with the Australian soap drama Neighbours. The most famous case here actually is probably Mad Max 2. I mean, the title is sweet and simple and lets you know it's a sequel to Mad Max, the second one. But in America, it was retitled to The Road Warrior, with it being feared that most Americans wouldn't have seen the first one. So if it's called Mad Max 2, they probably won't watch it, so The Road Warrior it was. So let's get back on the topic with Harry and the Hendersons. We've established that there were two totally contrasting marketing campaigns. But, if you can believe it, this movie would even get another title. So then we get to Australia's release of Harry and the Hendersons. And here in Australia, we just had to confuse things even more, where the movie's title was changed yet again. This time to Bigfoot in Harry and the Hendersons. My guess is when the powers that be behind the Australian release got word that it was called Harry and the Hendersons in the US and Bigfoot and the Hendersons in the UK, they probably didn't know what on earth to call the movie and just decided to have their cake and eat it and give it both titles and just hope for the best. So here down under, both the titles were meshed together to the mouthful of Bigfoot in Harry and the Hendersons. But I will say this, for the most part, when broadcast on TV, it was often simply just known as Harry and the Hendersons. In fact, the name change caused a few incidents of confusion in my childhood. I can remember when we were fairly new to the country, our TV guide, known as the TV Week, had scheduled the movie Bigfoot to be shown on TV one Saturday night. And I was really excited, thinking I was going to watch Bigfoot and the Hendersons, aka Harry and the Hendersons. But it was in fact a made-for-TV Disney movie called Bigfoot, which incidentally came out the same year as Harry and the Hendersons in 1987. I can remember watching this thing and thinking, hang on a minute, this doesn't feel like the Bigfoot that I know. Is this a sequel? Where's that guy from Santa Claus the movie who says, "For free"? This feels like the cheaper Harry and the Hendersons we already have at home. And when the Bigfoot movie that I did know and love was finally broadcast here on TV, it was advertised as Harry and the Hendersons. To which the confusion grew, and I was like, Harry and the Hendersons? What? What happened to Bigfoot? Look, at the end of the day, it's not really a big deal. The change was clearly superficial, just to help with the movie's marketing. And since then, in both here in Australia and the UK, the movie's title would be reverted back to simply being Harry and the Hendersons. And I don't even know if many people now even remember it being called Bigfoot and the Hendersons. Although I will say this, I do miss the Bigfoot logo, where the two O's in the word foot were big giant feet. My 5-year-old self was always impressed with that. But yet look, once again, it's not really that much of a big deal and doesn't take away the enjoyment of the movie. And I wouldn't be surprised if Harry and the Hendersons had other alternative titles in other non-English speaking parts of the world. And yep, when you look at that, the Portuguese version retitled the movie to A Noisy Guest. Well, yeah, I guess he did make some noise, so it checks out. All up, Harry and the Hendersons would go on to make $50 million in the box office, including its domestic income and international. So it still made some profit. But it still became an instant beloved classic to all those who watched it. It's one of those movies where its popularity would really take off later down the track, probably thanks to home video and TV broadcasts. And Rick Baker would win a well-deserved Academy Award for Best Makeup Effects. Hey, I guess it paid off to make amends with Spielberg. And as I've already mentioned, in later years, the movie would be reverted back to Harry and the Hendersons, both here in Australia and the UK. No one ever calls it Bigfoot anymore. Really, it doesn't matter what the movie is called, because it's really all about Harry and his kind and gentle soul, with a message that he's not a terrifying monster, but a being with kindness and empathy. It's a movie we could all probably learn a thing or two about. But regardless, whether or not the movie is called Harry and the Hendersons, Bigfoot and the Hendersons, or Bigfoot in Harry and the Hendersons, don't let that get in the way of Harry's big and ever-loving heart. It was a shock to my 5-year-old self learning that the movie Bigfoot and the Hendersons was actually called Harry and the Hendersons. It was a shock to the system, so to speak. So I'll be interested to hear similar stories from you guys. Did you grow up with a particular movie believing it was called one thing, only to find out it was called something else in some other part of the world? And there are so many other movie title changes that I haven't even mentioned. And I do think this topic generates interesting discussion. Anyway, I'm Minty, and the multiple title changes of Harry and the Hendersons is a weird tale of pop culture. Indeedy.